you see these branching mycelia resembling railroad tracks. To be honest, to me they don't look like railroad tracks, but they're basically parallel lines, roughly parallel, that they're crossing over each other. But you see linear structures that are the mycelia from the bacteria, and they're supposed to resemble railroad tracks. You can also culture it, but it takes a little while to get your culture results back. So typically your diagnosis is going to be based on the history and clinical signs. As far as the treatment, in the notes we talk about removing the scabs, cleaning the skin with mild antiseptic, and using systemic antibiotics in severe cases. So since it's a gram-positive bacteria, something like penicillin or tetracycline would be pretty effective against it. It's also self-limiting. If you remove the moist conditions, if the weather clears up, the sun comes out, eventually it'll clear up on its own if you did not treat it. In the notes we talk about removing the scab and cleaning the skin. So this was a horse that we had a few years ago, and the mistake I made was telling the students. So originally, this wasn't a horse, but originally it looked something like that, right? And so my diagnosis was based on the history and clinical signs, and then I told the students to bathe it, and then I left. I probably had to lecture. So I left for a lecture, and my vigorous, lovely students scrubbed all the hair off the back of this horse, leaving this erythematous skin. And fortunately, hair does grow back in most cases. So it did grow back. You just tell the owner that, we had a really, really bad case of dermatophilosis. I wasn't mad at the students because, stuff happens. You probably should not go to this extent, okay? You probably should not scrub all the hair off of it. So this is a pretty extreme case, but I like this slide because it shows you, hopefully you don't have to go to that extent to clear it up. Yes, they got rid of all the matted hairs, which was good, but you don't have to go to that extent. You could just, just brush it and, just put it on some PPG twice a day for 5 days. Would have cleared it up pretty well. Yes, it did have a pretty severe case of dermatophilosis, but I'd rather not have scraped off all the hair like this. But anyway, they meant well, and it turned out okay. All right. The condition also does occur in ruminants. So this is the kind of thing you'll see in a cow that has dermatophilosis. So you'll see these raised lesions, and this is a pretty severe example of it. But you can imagine with this case, you wouldn't want to try to catch this cow in a chute and scrub the entire body. You'd probably just catch it in a chute, give it an intramuscular injection, maybe of LA-200, and maybe repeat it in a week. And you'd be surprised that this would clear up pretty quickly. All right. All right. Folliculitis and impetigo, don't see that too often in large animals. See it occasionally, but not that often. You can pretty much read in your notes what it involves. Equine staphylococcus cellulitis. The only thing I wanted to highlight here is that occasionally you'll get a case where the presentation is that the horse is lame. If it's a thoroughbred, hopefully that'll trigger something in your mind, because it tends to occur most often in thoroughbreds, but it could be any horse, and the presentation is going to be that's lame. So you think you're working up a lame horse, and then what you'll notice is that in the course of your physical exam of that horse, you'll notice that the limb is very hot, okay? So it presents lame, it doesn't want to bear weight on the affected limb. And then when you start your physical exam, you start palpating the limb. It's very hot to the touch, and it's very painful. As soon as you start palpating the limb, the horse is flinching and trying to move away from you. basically at that point, you would realize that you're dealing with more than just a simple lameness. You take the temperature on that horse, it's going to have an elevated temperature. It has a very painful, swollen limb that's very hot to the touch. It could be that you're dealing with an equine staphylococcal cellulitis. The reason that it's important for you to diagnose that is because this is the dreaded flesh-eating bacteria. I didn't invent that phrase, but I wish I did, because it grabs your attention, flesh-eating bacteria. And you know, the cases that I've seen, they do progress pretty quickly. It's pretty important for you to diagnose it quickly and to treat it quickly. In the notes, we talk about the staphylococcal infection spreading along the tissue planes, and as it spreads, it's killing the tissue. It's not really eating the tissue, but it is killing the tissue. The tissue is starting to become necrotic, and so it's very, very serious because it's spreading along the tissue plane, so it can eventually spread along the entire, or through the entire body, although it typically starts out on the limbs. So it's basically a staph infection that starts spreading along the tissue planes, and it's causing a cellulitis, so inflammation of the tissues. And typically your diagnosis is going to be based on the history of the animal presenting lame, as well as a physical exam findings of this very hot, swollen, painful limb. And the treatment that we indicate there in the notes is basically just antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and supportive care. But it's important for you to administer that pretty quickly. So, you know, penicillin or LA200, probably penicillin, PPG. If you want to make sure it was getting there pretty quickly, you could use sodium penicillin, something soluble that you can inject intravenously. And the only thing with sodium penicillin is that you have to give that 3 to 4 times a day, whereas the PPG, you give that twice a day intramuscular. But it's serious enough to where you want to really jump on it and go ahead and give that intravenous sodium penicillin, and probably some anti-inflammatories like flumixant meglumine, for example. We also mentioned hydrotherapy and support bandages. So basically, you're trying to reduce the inflammation as much as possible. Maybe put it in a boot with cool water circulating through the boot, and support bandages, because the animal is very minimally weight bearing on the affected limb, so shifting weight to the other limb. So you want to have some support to try to prevent that supporting limb from breaking down. So this is one to make sure you read through that and understand what's going on. If you presented with a case of a lame horse with a hot, swollen, painful limb. Abscesses, you're pretty familiar with abscesses. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as their diagnosis and treatment. Actinomyces or lumpy jaw. We haven't seen a case in quite a while. When I first started working, we used to see them, but we haven't seen one in years and years. This is so-called lumpy jaw that you see with actinomyces. And it's a lot more common in cows. Occasionally it's seen in horses as well, but it's mainly going to be found in cattle. And what you get is these granulomatous lesions on the jaws. So the animal is presenting with a swollen jaw, and then on your physical exam, you notice that it's very, very solid to the feet, to the touch. And again, your diagnosis is usually based on the clinical signs of the swollen jaw that's very firm to the touch. If you wanted to do a biopsy and look at it under the microscope, you see the so-called sulfur granule appearance. You guys probably remember this from microbiology class. And basically the treatment is penicillin and sodium iodide is usually the treatment. Sodium iodide is kind of interesting because if you read your plums, they'll tell you that they don't know how sodium iodide works. There are a few drugs like that in vet medicine where we're not sure exactly how it works. We know that it works, but we're not sure the mechanism of action. The last condition under the heading of bacterial skin diseases is papillomatous digital dermatitis, sometimes just called digital dermatitis. There are a number of different synonyms for it: hairy foot warts, foot warts. One of the key findings of this disease is that it tends to occur in housed dairy cattle. So as you're reading the case scenario, we talk about dairy cattle being housed inside, and they're coming up lame, and on physical examination you see these papillonodular lesions in the interdigital region, and the animal is, and they're painful to the touch, and the animal is lame. So usually you'll make your diagnosis again based on the history and the clinical signs of these hairy foot warts. They're called hairy because, as the lesions develop, they start to shred, and it looks like there's hairs sticking out of the warty lesions. So this is another one of those diseases that a lot has been written about, and just to show you what has been written. So they talk about digital dermatitis, so, papillomatous digital dermatitis, or just digital dermatitis. Is that right? Can you see it? Is it right now? Okay. So, number of synonyms: strawberry foot rot, hairy heel warts, bovine digital dermatitis. Whatever the tag, it spells trouble. I like that. So that grabs your attention as well. And it's caused by a bacteria. For years, they used to say that they didn't know what the bacteria was, but now we know that it's a spirochete, treponema. So make note of the causative agent, treponema, which is a spirochete. You guys remember all these bacteria from microbiology class? Yeah. When was that? Last year?
First year.
Got microbiology in first year now? That's tough. I feel for you. Yeah. We used to have gross anatomy and histology, and that was pretty much it. Anyway, long time ago. So, spirochetes, treponema, so make note of the causative agent. I'll show you some pictures of what it looks like in a second. They talk about these red, rough, ulcerated looking lesions. Looks granular, like a strawberry, may have long hair-like structures growing from it, and it's very painful. Typically tends to be on the hind legs, or the hind feet. And that's what it looks like. So basically, you're looking at the plantar surface of the hind foot. So these are the two claws here. And then towards the heel region, you see this, I guess it looks like a strawberry, this papillonodular lesion here. And then you can imagine as the animal keeps walking on that, it's going to get shredded, and then it looks like there's filaments or hairs sticking out of it. So that's a typical appearance of the digital dermatitis, papillomatous digital dermatitis, strawberry foot rot. All of those are synonyms for the disease. As far as the treatment, so does not respond well to systemic antibiotics, and so the treatment for decades has been these foot baths. People experiment with different ingredients, different formulations of foot baths. Pretty commonly they use formalin. You guys can imagine, advantages and disadvantages of using formalin in a dairy animal. You don't want it to splash up on the udders. You want to make sure you're washing the udder before you milk the animal. Otherwise, you're going to get formalin in your milk, which you probably don't want. But formalin foot baths are pretty effective. They also use, topical oxytetracycline spray. Try to dry the foot, just about impossible in a dairy barn. But so basically, they're going to concentrate on foot baths with different formulations. Formalin being one of them, and if you have a few animals that are really severely affected, you could try spraying it with a topical antibiotic. In this case, they're talking about using oxytetracycline. Extremely difficult to eliminate, so that's one of the take-home messages. It is pretty hard to eliminate. Remember, it doesn't respond well to systemic antibiotics, so you treat it with topical treatment. The problem with that, as you could imagine, is if you have a few hundred cattle going through a foot bath, after the first dozen or so, the foot bath is going to get pretty diluted out or pretty muddy and relatively ineffective. So it's very difficult to eliminate. And, ideally, in an ideal world, you try to prevent introducing the disease, improve hygiene, reassessing your stocking density, avoiding grouping infected and healthy cattle, and screening cattle for lesions. So basically, you try to do all this, but, in a dairy situation, have you guys ever visited a very large dairy? You visited a dairy, but maybe not very large, when you're undergraduate years? A small dairy, yeah. So big dairies, they can have thousands of cows, and, depending on how many people you can afford to hire to monitor your cattle every day, it can become a pretty serious problem. All right. So different intervention strategies. Let's see, what's your take-home message here? So formalin again, 4% formaldehyde on 1 day a week, 24 weeks. And what else are they do? So every other week, 30 minutes, 2%. So they're trying different combinations, varying the concentration of the formalin or formaldehyde, varying the amount of time that the cow is in contact with the foot bath. None of the alternative strategies significantly reduce either number or severity of the lesion in comparison with the control strategy. Bottom line, it's a very difficult disease to actually eradicate or treat, and ideally you concentrate on not introducing it to your herd. Yes?
How long do I have to stand in that foot bath? Because I work in there, and I don't know how long you can get one.
Exactly. So that's why I asked if any of you had been to a dairy. So it's one thing to talk about this in theory. It's another thing to round them up and march them through a foot bath, and then their feet are dirty. So their feet are dirty going into the foot bath, and then they're just muddying up the foot bath. So yeah, it's a very, very difficult condition to actually treat. 3% sodium carbonate. They're trying a lot of different things here. Pressure spray of water. Bottom line, difficult to treat. All right, so let's see. I think I'll probably finish up the rest of this on Thursday. I've also finished grading my exam. Like I said yesterday, most of you did pretty well on that exam. If you want to see your grade, you can come by my office and I'll tell you what grade you made. If you want to look at your tests, I put a lot of red ink on your papers, so don't get discouraged by the amount of red ink. so some of you are pretty funny, you know, you actually ask me questions on your exam. I'm the one asking you the question. Don't put question marks beside my question. But anyway, that's okay. So if you want to see your test, or if you want to know what grade you made,